Hello, everybody. My name's Milan Starcic. Welcome to Freedom Rising, a podcast dedicated to empowering individuals on the journey to personal growth, lasting serenity, and freedom from addiction. Tune in and join the movement. Your journey to freedom starts here. We neither represent, promote, or demote any 12-step program or organization. We are merely souls on the path of recovery with the desire to expand our lives and experiences and share them with you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 36th Recovery Freedom Rising podcast. I'm Milan Starcic with co-host Dustin J. Welcome to Breakfast Recovery and the third in our four-part series on the steps. Today we look at steps 7, 8, and 9. You want to bring us in, Dustin?
Sure, Milan. Thanks for having me again. Do you want to just jump right into reading the steps?
Yeah, so maybe let's just do one at a time. We'll just do 7, and then we'll work on that for a bit, and then we'll move on.
Sure, sounds good. So number 7, we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings.
Okay. Now, first of all, what does humility mean to you?
So it's funny, there's a lot of the stuff in the program, and as I came into recovery, that a lot of these words had different meanings when I first started coming into it. Reservations was another one. Humility, to me, humility originally meant to me that it was being humiliated. It was being made fun of, something like that. But humility, I guess, to me means having the self-awareness or the ability to not take yourself so seriously, not to I guess to accept that you're not strong enough to do something, to accept that you need help with something, that's something that you're struggling with, to be aware of. You know I think that a lot of it was we thought we could do everything ourselves when we come into this. I think that's that self-will ties into that part of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's 100%. And, even to take it one step further, I'm going to read a couple sentences that I dug out of some literature here that, to me, I thought this was just a real nugget of wisdom. The difference between humility and humiliation can be the level of acceptance we have about the information we get. When we listen with an open mind, anyone can carry a message to us. So humility to me is like being able to do an honest step 4.
Yeah.
Like when we humbly ask him to take our shortcomings, we're actually honestly assessing those shortcomings. We're not hiding behind the ego to downplay certain ones. And then when we listen with an open mind, anyone can carry a message to us. And that lets us go to a meeting, and maybe that person that you've had a beef with last week delivers a share that changes your life because you've got an open mind to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, so for you, how describe some of the effects of your step 7?
So I had it kind of summed up into a couple questions that I was going to ask you.
Sure,
My
you could
step
ask me
7.
first.
Sure, if you want. Yeah, I'll maybe do it that way.
I don't have an attachment to which direction it's going.
Okay, sure, sounds good. I'll so the one I was gonna ask is, was it difficult for you to truly surrender and accept that you couldn't remove these yourself? Like, was it hard for you? Like, to me, the way I interpret the humility part in this, yeah, I agree 100% with you on, you have to first have enough humility to address the things in step 4. But like, was it hard for you to humble yourself and accept that you couldn't do this on your own, that you had to trust in that higher power?
And that's something I think that I struggle with all the time. I've had a few conversations with my sponsor, and, I'm like, I need to change this. And then he's like, you're missing the point of step 7 right there.
Yeah.
Like if it's you who's still the puppeteer, you've missed the entire point of this, that it's us who can't do it, and that we just have to be willing to have it removed and let our higher power do the rest of that. You know, it's really funny because I feel like in my own personal experience, I had a really easy time with the surrendering of my addiction. But it's like now I realize I think I'm addicted to a lot of my shortcomings, you know, and letting those be taken away by something else has thus far proved a very slow chipping process. You know, it's not something that was as dramatic as the actual surrendering of my obsession and compulsion to use. And I, I find that really funny. Like, not funny, ha ha, but it's a perplexing thing.
Mhm.
Like, one part of me can give away this thing that like drove me insane, literally life unmanageable, restored me to sanity. You know, like my obsessive and compulsive thoughts about my addiction were so all encompassing. There's something weird going on with my mic. I'm just gonna switch up the setting. There we go. Oh, how like whoa, that's so much better. Anyway, and yet, you know, it's not as easy to surrender my anger or my intolerance
Mhm.
or my acceptance of loved ones.
Yeah.
And, you know, psychologically, it eats up a lot of my mind, and I really want that to happen, you know.
Yeah.
And the one thing though, you know, is that acceptance of the time frame that isn't ours,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. But I found with myself, like with that one and on that question particularly, is like, I tie the mental health side into this one a fair bit. I had a two-part problem. I had the addiction and I had a lot of mental health from childhood that I worked on separately, outside of this program as well.
Mm,
And as a child with a lot of trauma, there's a want to try to control everything around you. When you grow up with no control around you, not being able to control your settings and stuff, that's where a lot of that anxiety and the OCDs and all that kind of stuff come from. And that's where I found with myself with that one, surrendering to let something else take control of your life is a hard, hard thing to do. And that's where, that
mm.
parallel between the mental health and the addiction really kicks in. For myself anyways, that was the one part about that I really found. Um, and then the
It's
other
it.
question I had for you, Milan.
Mm.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, 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 no.
No, you. Oh,
I'm ready for your question. Go.
okay. Um, the other question I had for you was, and you kind of touched on it a bit, I guess, but do you still struggle with your shortcomings trying to surface, like today, present day? You're what, coming up on a year and a half in a month or so here. You like, is it still? Do you still see those shortcomings coming up a lot, or
I think it's going to be a battle for the rest of
yeah,
my life. Just yesterday, I mentioned it on last night's podcast, but I'm not afraid to mention it again. There was something in I was sitting in the kitchen just before I went down. My wife said something to me, whether it was offensive or not, that's irregardless of how I reacted, but it was like I have this like don't want to be treated like the second class citizen in my relationship. And so my instant reaction when I perceived that she had said that negatively, it wasn't even negative words. It was like
yeah,
I got to like judge her intention of those words. And then I
hmm
responded like a jerk. And I was
hmm
like, I said to her out loud, I'm like, I don't know what it is, but for some reason, I can't seem to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like I can't in my brain say, "Oh, she meant something positive there." You know, like so I'm obviously judging her actions, which definitely is a form of intolerance. And then I'm using that perceived intention like which I haven't even asked her about. Like, hey, did you intend to be
Mhm.
hurtful with that? I don't even ask the question. I just respond like, well, I'm not going to be the only one who's hurt here.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
like I would say that that is one of my biggest ongoing struggles is
yeah.
breaking out of that cycle with close loved ones.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of really easy for me to give the benefit of doubt to people I just know peripherally because it's like, you know, an interaction every day or a couple times a week, but when it's relentlessly over and over, like with family members,
Mhm.
somehow that erodes my tolerance or acceptance. And it's,
Mhm.
like at least now it's at a level of awareness versus just being in the dark and being a shithead reaction over and over and over. Like at least
Yeah.
now I'm recognizing it, I'm verbalizing it, and I'm apologizing for it. I'm doing a step 10 on it right there over and over, which we'll get into next episode, listeners.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. And
I
what about
I
you on that one?
I find the same thing. Um, there's two areas that they really surface on for me primarily. First is, of course, the home life, the family life. Especially that dynamic with my wife. I personally struggle when I feel like my wife is turning into my mom. I know that's a really weird thing to say, but
I've said
I
that
don't.
sentence
I
to my
start
wife.
getting,
I'm like, you're not my mom. You're
yeah,
my partner.
exactly. Yeah, and then with us, it seems to be, I don't know that I'd call it the power struggle, but the hierarchy within the family. I don't know. That sounds really ridiculous to say out loud, but it is. I'm still, I'm trying to evolve and be a better human being here, but I'm still a caveman at the end of the day in a lot of aspects. I've got a little bit more of an old school view. I was raised in northern part of the country where things are a little bit 20 years behind the rest of the world, and I was raised in a I I don't want to say that it was I Andy and Mayberry kind of setting. Like I was raised in a rural area, country style setting where dad was the breadwinner and the main earner and the this and the that, and mom cooked the supper at home. Like that was the way it was for us. It's not a derogatory thing in any way, and I find myself still to this day kind of getting caught in that and having to check myself and say, whoa, this ain't 1975 America here. This is modern day, and your wife is entitled to have her opinions, and you had a fucked up life for a while, and she has every right to be talking to
Mhm.
you the way that she is. You know what I mean? Like it's just that way. And then the other area for myself is I find that when I'm in stress or duress, my shortcomings start firing rapid, like right then and there. When I'm feeling anxious, cornered, nervous, my old Rolodex opens up and it just pop, 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 pop. They're coming right away. Like those are, they're right there. That's what surfaces first in my file cabinet for me to start reacting to. And the more stressful it is, the faster they come. Like you and I've been talking this last week. I get a little bit of turmoil with my work right now. I've got a good job, but our industry's quite slow, and stress trickles down from the top on down. And I really find that in these situations and whatnot, I have to really put a lot of effort in to keep myself in check. When I can go down the list of defects in the book, and I can probably check off 75% of the defects arising in my everyday, multiple times a day that I am constantly working through a quick set of steps in my head most days right now, all the way from surrender right to the number 10, doing the quick inventory right through my day, just to kind of keep them in check. So yeah, no, definitely I'm just coming up on my 6 months again here after going back out. So it's I certainly don't have that much clean time by any stretch, and it's just something I guess the biggest part for me is I'm actually grateful though that I have the awareness to watch for them now. I can usually see them pretty quick. I'm not going to sit here and say that they don't make it out of my mouth sometimes, but I can usually catch it within a minute or two afterwards and apologize, acknowledge it, and correct it right quickly if I do. So,
And another quote I saw was, when we treat happiness as a spiritual principle, We can see its relationship to humility. Our ability to enjoy our lives is
Hmm.
directly related to our willingness to let go of our self obsession. And for
Yeah.
me, I see that like I'm really stuck inside myself. Like, how's it affecting me? Before I'm like, how are they
Hmm.
feeling? Or what's going on inside them? And
Yeah.
how do you find that for yourself inside, relating humility to happiness?
Well, the one part that you touched on, about seeing the how it's affecting somebody else rather than just yourself, that's huge. That's been the real big change for me, especially this last couple months. I found that when I completed my set of steps for the first time, especially those last, you could say 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I really started to gain the awareness of others, not just my part. I found that up until the step 4 and 5, it was just all about me. I was in that very early part of working the steps where it was all about me. And then you start kind of looking at the effect on the others. So I can relate with you 100% there, Milan. That's the good part about it. But the happiness to humility, I agree. You know, I again, I think a lot to do with the mental health and the past trauma stuff. I was the first one. I could not be happy for somebody else. If I seen somebody else be happy or succeeding in something, my first instinct was jealousy, resentment, envy. I did not want to see other people do well. I didn't. I was very sick that way. When I say that, I mean even like as bad as this is to say, and I'll have some humility right now and say it, I didn't even like to see my kids do better than I did. I didn't like to see my wife doing well. I was such a negative, shitty black hole when I was in my addiction. And, I now have had that major change where I love to see my loved ones thriving and flourishing. I do. It makes me happy. I love to see another addict doing well. As you know, I've recently just got my first sponsee, possibly a second one here, starting to work with, and like that gift of being able to give something away and help another person. Man, oh man, I never knew the joy that would come in that. Like I really didn't, and I mean that was something I was certainly not capable of before. Because I not only did I not give a shit about you before, I didn't want to see you do good. I wanted to see you struggle. My disease wanted to see you sick. And now I can 100% relate the two of them together with that humility. It made me understand a lot of other people and get outside of myself, I think. So yeah.
It's amazing the miracle of these steps. Like what a genius invention and what a
Yeah.
life-changing set of actions. Like if somebody
Yeah.
told me with some reflection, a pen and a paper that I could completely change my entire mindset towards life, you know,
Hmm.
in such a short time. I I,
Hmm.
I would have been I would have bet against it, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah. My wife is probably sick of hearing it by now. Like I tell her all the time that I think everybody should do steps, not just an addict, like just
Yeah.
anybody. It's gonna just benefit you. And she, like you said, she's probably quite tired of hearing it because I say it all the time. Like I mean, it's life changing, Lon. So
I literally have a friend going through a divorce right now, and he's actually going to do a set of steps after a conversation we had.
nice, right on. Well, why not?
He's just like, I
Yeah,
don't want to carry this stuff to another relationship.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
so he's actually going to do the codependency steps
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
think he feels that like after our conversations, that's probably the route. So I got just another thing I want to read about humility, and then maybe we
sure.
can move on from
Yeah,
this
sounds
one.
good.
Okay, so humility is honesty about who and what we are. When we come to see how much we have and how much we have to offer, there's there is a difference between being in the program and living the program. When we come to an understanding of this program for ourselves, it becomes our own and it becomes a part of us. How has this been your experience or not in this recovery, Mr. Dustin Mother effing J?
um, well, I mean, kind of like I just mentioned there, that humility part, it has become a part of me. It's just become a part of my everyday life. You know, I the way I interact with everybody in my days, there's still one area of my life that I kind of struggle with some humility. I am a competitive person by nature when it comes to sports and this and that. I'll be honest, it's something I'm kind of embarrassed about, but I've been having to keep myself in check with my kids' sports stuff. I find I get caught up in that stuff sometimes, and I lose my humility right in there. I really do, as ridiculous as that is. But in general, yeah, I've really woven humility into my life, and yeah, it's something I wouldn't want to let go of anymore, Milan. How about yourself?
So, reviewing that statement, the first kind of sentence, humility is honesty about who and what we are.
Mhm.
Like rolling through the steps, right? I had to admit that I was powerless and that my life was unmanageable. That
Mhm.
was an honesty that took 17 years in the making for me. 37
Yeah.
if you go right to the start. But I just, the first 20, I was just in denial that there was never a problem inside those 20 years. We'll
Yeah.
call them the golden years. Like, anyway, um, but then getting to step four, doing that searching and fearless moral inventory, that made me fearless. That required a lot of honesty, and there was a lot of internal pain in that step of just like, oh, like I remember it was like kind of like when you eat something that's not necessarily good for you, like we were talking about treats a little while before we started this,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, it's all good, and then you kind of get a bellyache, and
Yeah.
and it's not gonna kill you, but for a few hours it sure doesn't feel good to be like having done what you did. And
Yeah.
when I had my part exposed in all of my resentments, so anybody who's new and hasn't listened to the other episodes, Dustin and I have done a wonderful episode right before this one, part two of our journey through the steps, and you could take a look at sort of what is involved with the step four. But I'm not going to digress to that entirely right now. And but that took a real honesty, and uh the humility involved with that to me is being able to do it regardless of that discomfort. Like the growth doesn't happen without change, right?
Hmm.
And then you know we come to see how much we have and how much we have to offer. Like
Hmm.
it's not all bad. Like,
Hmm.
in fact, like just getting that far in the steps, well, that shows that we've got some honesty in us. That shows we've
Yeah.
got some open mindedness, willingness, some courage, and we've got some acceptance for who we are, We might not like it.
Yeah.
Like, don't mistake the word acceptance for liking,
Yeah.
because I certainly got a lot of acceptance for things that I freaking hate, you know,
Yeah.
and
No, that's right.
when we come to an understanding of this program for ourselves, it becomes our own and it becomes a part of us. Like, I can't go back. I can never go back to not knowing about my defects and shortcomings. There's no rewind button for me now. Like, Scotty N from our group there,
Yeah.
he said, he's like, the steps ruined my using.
Hmm.
Like when he relapsed after knowing the steps, it was impossible for him not like to enjoy the using, because he knew like where he was failing and what would, like imagine, okay, like you think, right, that you dwell on the failure inside your addiction, but then
Hmm.
wait till you get like 3 years clean And then
Hmm.
that happens. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna know. You're gonna be like, shit, man, that reservation was there. Like imagine the cycling of your brain
Yeah.
over and over and over on that part. And
Yeah.
like, these days, okay, a good example is 15 and a half months ago, that
Hmm.
thing that went down with my wife
Hmm.
yesterday that I just talked about. Okay, first of all, I would have been unaware that I had even done something. I would not have talked to her about it. I would
Hmm.
not have apologized for it. And I damn well sure wouldn't have admitted it publicly in a
Yeah.
forum like this, that that was a weakness and that it's something that I need to work on. Like, they say pain shared is pain spared. Well, it's like I'm calling myself out on this publicly on this show to work on that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have had the honesty to do
Hmm.
that, even if I was aware before.
Yeah.
I
No.
would have twisted it to staying her fault, and it
Yeah.
would have been my excuse to go use.
Absolutely.
I would have just been like, "Oh, she fucking pissed me off last night, man." I would have been sitting here right now, 16
Yeah.
hours later, saying, "Hey, man, I need to change."
Yeah.
Like that to me is humility rolling into that aspect right there, And I'm not
Yeah.
bragging about that. All I'm saying is that, that that is the understanding of the program for me and how it becomes part of me. Part of me now can't sit back and pretend that that stuff is not going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you mentioned Scotty. I've had the same experience, Milan. I've been 3.5 years within the program, and like I mentioned, I'm just coming on 6 months again. And I've had a few going back out since I came in and started, and typically I was getting anywhere from 8 months to a year and a bit at a time of clean time in between my, relapses. And the first thing that I just wanted to kind of mention and touch on when it is there in case anybody's listening is, I used to have this detrimental thought that once I relapsed, I lost everything I'd put into my recovery and what I was doing. And you nailed it. And like you said, Scotty mentioned it. You can't unlearn what you learned even through that time. Even if you go back out and have that relapse, what you did isn't gone. It's still in there. It's still planted in there. And
Mhm.
I've never gotten through a full set of steps until just recently. I would usually make it up to four, or maybe sometimes I got as high as five and six, but I never got beyond there. And that humility tying into that relapse, like myself, having the humility to accept that I'd done something. I was a human, I'm an addict. This disease will do that to people at times, but having the humility to pop back up into a group like what we go to, where our groups of a tight little bunch of people that we see, there's a core bunch of people that are there pretty much day in and day out. If they're not there every day, they're there 4 to 5 days a week, kind of thing. And
Mhm.
when somebody goes absent, you notice. I mean, everybody does. And when myself, some of my relapses ranged from 10 days to 2 or 3 months of going back out. And to pop back on after that, there's some humility that takes to do that. And for me, I tied again. I mentioned this one thing quite often because it is something that literally saved my life. Is another member, a lady in our group, that had the humility after some clean time to share that she had relapsed and come back. That thing there was such a lifesaver for me because it showed me it was okay that when it happened to me to do the same thing, that I wouldn't be judged. And it's because another addict had that humility to do the same. So yeah.
That's the one thing that, like regardless of any disunity inside a group, dude,
Hmm.
nobody's mad at somebody coming back after a relapse. Our arms are
No,
open. All we want is for you to survive, you
exactly.
know? And
Yeah.
like, when have you ever thought, oh man, I'm so mad at him for relapsing? Like,
Yeah.
I hate that he's coming back. That's just,
No.
you know, like that. Honestly, like, I'm so relieved when someone comes back,
Yeah.
you know?
No, that's right.
Like, I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, they're not dead.
Yeah. No, that's
That's
right. If anything,
literally.
it's kind of the opposite. You almost get a little bit of angst when somebody's out relapsing, not because you're being judgmental, but because you're worrying about them, because the struggles that they're going through. So yeah.
Okay, so how about you read step 8 now? And do like
Sure.
kind of a
So
dance when
we
you're doing it, like
we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So I wrote a little bit of notes on this one. I guess I'll kind of jump in with here right away, and then
mm.
I'll ask you a question
Yeah, yeah,
on it,
go
Milan.
for it. Yeah.
So when I wrote my list out, this is one area that I had to be careful with. You know, I think that, well, as you know, when I finished my set of steps, I instantly dove back into some more to take a deeper dive into some of these step 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, because I got through them the first time, but I ultimately think I could do a better job on it. I could go a little
Mm,
deeper because, in all honesty, I had to identify. I think I was holding the reservation. I wasn't wanting to get quite as deep as I should on some of it. Like that's, I just have to be. I have to have some humility and be honest about that. I mean, there
mm,
was parts of it. I found that, like, mine, when I was creating this list and playing the tape out, I really found that I was getting in my own head about, let's say, a lot of my issues happened when I was in my work, in my professional setting. um my addiction, I was a bit of a strange critter. My addiction never flared up at home. I never really used at home or around my kids or my family, but the second I turned loose, I work away from home on the road. The second I got out that door, that's when my shit would start. And so quite often my disease, my addiction, and my problems were around my work and my career. Um, so when I was doing up this list, a lot of the wrongs I had and a lot of the people that I needed you know, um, to make my amends or harm involved my professional life. And I got really inside my own head and scared about that because sitting there thinking, okay, I've already done the damage of losing jobs, missing work, just kind of being an unreliable shit show. Um, what am I going to do if I circle back to these people that have, I mean, I've lost jobs, I've been fired. I quite often I would just quit before they had a chance to fire me. I thought I was saving face doing it that way. And I was kind of worried about, is there going to be more negative repercussion to my life if I go back to these people and say to them now, oh, I'm an addict, I need to apologize for you. This was my part in there. And I got really in my own head about, that kind of thing. Did you ever run into any of that, Milan? Like, did you have any of those issues at all, or?
I definitely, it sits in the back of my head being kind of the public face of this podcast, right? I feel
Hmm.
that there definitely is the potential for that, but I've just
Hmm.
come to the point where I'm literally throwing my cards into the wind and saying, "This is who I am. I'm hoping I'm saving someone else's life, even if it's at the expense of maybe ruining one aspect of mine."
Hmm. Even as I said that, I can sit there and I can hear the ridiculousness in that statement, because I mean, you're sitting there worried about the repercussions for coming to somebody and apologizing, saying
Yeah,
I'm an addict and I did wrong. Well, like, they didn't know you were an addict already when you're disappearing for 5 days at a time. You know what I mean? Like, how ridiculous of a thought is that, right? So it's,
like who did we think we were fooling, dude? Like I look at
yeah.
pictures of myself and I'm like, how ridiculous. How
Yeah.
presumptuous. Like how egocentric
Yeah.
that is to think that how my state of being wasn't obvious.
Yeah. No, that's right. Well, another thing I really noticed when I went through mine and haven't circled around back to doing a second part of these steps, is that when I did the first round, my list of people and that, it was literally just that people. There was, and it was the core people in my life, my wife, my kids, the close family, the close, well, I don't really have any friends left from my using days. I wrecked those. So, I mean, but like those kind of people were what was on there. But, I found that thinking about it this time, I've really included more of the institutions, the financial end of it. I mean, my disease left me in financial ruin, like I'm sure many people. It's, I got a long hole to dig out of. I'm grateful I'm digging out of it now, but like, I found that, I don't know how you'd make an amends, but on the list this time, I got, some financial institutions, the this, the that kind of thing. Like, did you get into any of
Yeah.
that, Milan, or did you keep yours mostly just to
Well,
people, or?
I kept mine mostly to things that I felt like I had a potential to deal with. I
Yeah,
do feel though
yeah,
that there will be an even deeper dive in my future as well on it. Like one of my
yeah,
friend's sponsors was like, "Okay, I want to see at least 175 things." I was
yeah,
like, I was like
yeah.
175 things. Like that's gonna be a stretch, but. The problem for me is that it's almost like I'll be driving and I'll see something and it'll trigger a memory that I had lost until that moment and be like, oh shit, that's someone I need to do an amends for. And if I don't pull over and make a note in my phone, then by the
Mhm.
time I get somewhere, I've also forgot it again. I was like, now what was that thing I thought of? Like there is like
Yeah.
if we're getting nitty gritty, there's
Mhm.
thousands of things I need to make
Oh yeah,
amends for you
yeah,
know
absolutely.
whether I'll get the chance to like I guess things like Facebook let you track down people, but there's
Yeah,
just some instances that were like one night specials of just meeting somebody, something strange happening and never seeing them again, but thinking
yeah,
that might not affected their life so greatly, or something.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. No, for sure. Yeah, I didn't have
um
a whole lot more on step 8. That one was pretty short when I wrote it out there
okay.
myself. Yeah.
I've got some stuff
Sure.
about it. Okay, so here we go. Accepting our assets is part of our amends to ourselves, but more importantly, it begins the process by which we make our amends to society. Now, I found that to be a really interesting statement um, because, there's certain things that embarking on making amends requires. There's for sure, you have to have acceptance for your part in things, right?
Mhm.
You need to have the courage to go and make those amends, but you also need to see those assets, like it mentioned, to be able to do the amends. You know,
Mhm.
and can you tell me how you see that sentence applying to any part of your recovery? Do you want me to repeat it?
No, no, I'm all good. I kind of know exactly what that's getting at. For myself, Milan, I can acknowledge my assets after I stopped, being so sick and going through these. I did see, like I do have the ability when I'm healthy to, simple things like being a good dad to my kids. Like, I'm grateful. I'm getting a second chance with my kids right now. And I'm taking every advantage of that I can to try to. I've got limited time to, quote unquote, pump out some good human beings into their earth here before they leave underneath of my home. And really trying to instill some good in them. So I look at that as an asset. My time and me can be an asset when it's used for good. I can be an asset to being a good husband to my wife. You know, I've really I've really found a shift in my personality and my thinking of wanting to help others. And I try to watch what I say because I want to keep that humility and not be yattering about the things that I'm doing in the background because I don't really want people to know a lot about that. That's for me, that's the stuff that I like doing. And I think that sometimes we got to be careful that we don't start talking too much about a lot of that good stuff that you're doing because then are you really doing a good thing or are you doing it because you want praise for doing it, right?
Mm.
And the other way I look at it is my wife and I, we kind of have a little bit of a plan. As I mentioned, our financial ruin that we can put ourselves in sometimes takes a while to dig ourselves out of. I do have kids that have to go to hopefully university and whatnot. So the way it is, I'm kind of stuck where I am for about 10 to 15 years yet, doing the kind of career and the work that I'm doing. It's just life. It's reality. It's one of those things I have to accept because I'm not going to be able to change that one.
And the
But
sooner you do, the
ultimately, my
happier you'll
goal.
be.
Exactly. And my goal is to get through that as happy as I can and not make it miserable and look forward to, I have a real goal of I would love to move down to the Okanagan area. It's kind of my happy place. I love it down there. Ultimately when this is all said and done and I've raised my kids and we've done our thing, I would love nothing more than to come down there and have a real simple little basic life and be able to spend the rest of my time that I have volunteering or working in a treatment center. I don't have a lot of schooling for it, but something recovery based and recovery center. And I think that,
Mm.
that's that's an asset right there in its own, to want to help other people and give back to society.
Mm,
This I mean, that's kind of how that relates to myself, Milan. I mean, that's what I interpret out of that. Like, how about yourself?
well, you know, I've had a couple conversations with my wife and my daughter, and some of it was through this whole process of growth and recovery, and that, and you know,
Mhm.
one of the nice things that they said to me was, like, you're still a really great guy. Like you, yes, you were an addict and you did a lot of shitty things, but like you also did a lot of great things, as a dad. And, like my daughter got a lot of time from me, a lot of, a lot of love, a lot of traveling, a lot of experience together. Like there was certainly a lot of disappointment, trauma, maybe from stupid things I did that she witnessed or whatever, but it wasn't all bad.
Yeah.
And, hearing them say that let me start to believe that, like I definitely feel that when I started going through the steps and saw everything, it was real easy for me to just think it was all bad and I was all bad. And that I was coming from that place of like, there's nothing good here, you know?
Mhm.
Like, and that's a much bigger person to rebuild than somebody who, has some great qualities, but also a pile of defects,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
and coming to a little bit of self acceptance, and that really has been, a little part of the immense process, right?
Hmm.
And, which kind of leads me into the next thing I got here is that the understanding that we can forgive and be forgiven, that we take responsibility for our actions and make better choices, allows us to grow.
Hmm.
How has that been your experience?
Um, well, it's yeah, I mean, really, until you can take responsibility for those actions and, like you say, forgive and be forgiven, it's really hard to grow and do anything else. I mean, if you don't do those
Mm,
things, you're more or less going to just be stuck spinning your wheels, really. One thing pops into my head right away, and I don't mind sharing this. I'm a generational addict. My mom has a horrible addiction still to this day. She's very much stuck in hers. I don't think she'll ever change.
mm,
And I held a lot of resentments towards her. There's a lot of shitty stuff that went on in my childhood because of her. And one of my things that I hung on to for a long time was my resentment towards her. Like, that was a horrible one for me. And you know, one area that I see, and like, I'm going to be very careful how I say this. I'm not looking to rush out and have a relationship with my mom. I'm not looking to bring
mm,
that toxicity back around my life or my kids or anything. But you know what? I forgive her. I do. I understand this disease well enough. I understand her situation that led her to where her is. And if anything, I have empathy and sorriness for her. Like, I feel bad for her that she's stuck where she is now. And that being able to, forgive her, even though I haven't spoken to her to do it, but just in my own
mm,
mind, let go of that, the growth that came from that stuff. And then, also, um, to see my wife as, you know, I'm not going to say she's completely forgiven me for everything. I put my wife through hell for 20 some years, or well, not 20 some. We've been married for 13, but my 20-year addiction drug her through 13 years of hell. And I'm starting to see the forgiveness and the trust being rebuilt. And what that's doing for me personally is it's huge. It's a big part of my growth. And I mean, so I have to give that away to others as well too, not just in my own. What about yourself, Milan?
you know, I definitely used to think that the amends were for the other people when I was on the outside of the
Hmm.
program. Because I had had a couple friends in the program approach me about amends, and, you know, um, I was like, whatever, man. I don't even remember what the fuck you're talking about. You know, like I honestly couldn't even remember what they were holding on to there.
Yeah.
And, you know, if that shouldn't have given me a clue that the amends was for the maker, you know,
Mhm.
um, I like this analogy that I heard from a guy named Ans who came on the Unity thing is that, you know, the amends is like Dustin calls me and I've got an amends for lying to Dustin and, you know, maybe intolerance for Dustin and maybe a lack of compassion for Dustin in his situation. And, you know, so every time the phone rings, I look down and see Dustin's name and I'm like, liar, liar,
Yeah.
unacceptable Milan, uncompassionate liar. And until I make those amends, that doesn't allow me that peace to clear off that past and see myself as somebody who isn't a liar, you know,
Hmm.
like calling it out, you know, pain shared is pain lessened again coming up right
Yeah.
now. But it's only with that self forgiveness and self acceptance that I can even now look at Dustin as not a tainted spirit as well.
Hmm.
And so, like, I see, you know, from his share that day, it really changed, like flipped my whole understanding of self-acceptance and acceptance of others. And that, like, if I can't see myself as anything but through a tainted lens of
Hmm.
dirtiness, right?
Hmm.
Then how can I look out at you through that tainted lens and ever see you as something pure?
Yeah. No,
You
that's
know, you know,
very
and
true. Yeah.
that you know, that to me just was something like, and it is still something like there's some people that, you know, I've written letters for that I won't be able to see inside my amends, but I
Hmm.
still feel that that is something that is probably going to be something I work on for the next, you know, 10 to 20 years,
Yeah.
you know, because when they come up, when they come up of things I've forgotten and haven't made the amends on, man, I'm telling you, it's like a bellyache. Like it's
Yeah.
like, oh, like I literally think, oh fuck. Like it just
Yeah.
curls me over with thoughts of my actions. And that
Yeah.
that keeps me sick, man.
Yeah.
You know? So I have another thing. Self-acceptance frees our imagination. Work on the steps allows us to feel worthy of success. The answers are in different places for each of us, and we may not know them until we've found them. Doing the work of recovery frees us in ways we can't predict. It's only in experiencing freedom that we learn where we were bound before.
Hmm.
Hey?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? That
Yeah.
it's like, and so how has this been your experience inside going through the steps and self
So
awareness?
yeah, I think about that. I had this pattern of crash, burn, run. And, I was just this little dart running across Alberta, British Columbia, and parts of Saskatchewan from, job to job, project to project. I never faced anything that I did. I never had that acceptance of what I've done. I just ignored it and ran from it all the time. And what I really found is that when I actually stopped and started working in the program, and I mean, I did that with my family to a degree too. I did it in all parts of my life, really. I would just kind of, it was like rebooting a computer. I would fuck everything up so bad, and I would just try to push a button, erase it, and start new somewhere else. I never really wanted to deal with it. And I found that when I really started working this and went through the lists and had to start putting the list together to make the amends and everything else, and actually started not just putting the list together but acting on them and doing them. And like one of the ones I did, and I mean, I don't mind sharing some of this stuff, but like one of the ones that I did do in my professional life was a fellow that I worked for a few times. And he was, I still consider him a friend, a really good guy. He's very non-judgmental and whatnot, and he was one of my amends that I did make. And um by going to him, I did it over the phone. I didn't do it in person. He lives quite a ways away, but by talking to him and just genuinely apologizing for my part and owning my part and facing my part, there was just something so therapeutic in it. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered how he reacted really, but by me, it's like you say, that pain shared is pain lessened, by me just doing the physical act of acknowledging it, of putting it out there, of it became real. It was something I was no longer hiding from. It was no longer something that I was carrying with me, this weight that was bottled up in my back that I didn't know. Like, I mean, I put my cards on the table, and thankfully in that situation, he was awesome about it. He couldn't have been nicer. He said, "I'm really glad to see you doing well," and he says, "Don't worry about it." And unfortunately, in our industry, there's a lot of addiction. So I'm not the first one, and I certainly won't be the last one. But by doing that, I gained a bit of a credibility with him. I think I regained a part of me by doing it. I
Mm.
really did get something out of it, and I think he did too. And I walked away from it, in that situation, it was a good experience, right? So, I mean,
Mm.
yeah, I hope I didn't trail off or ramble off on there, but when you're saying that,
No,
that's just kind of
I
what
think
I
that was a
kind
great
of came
story for
to
that.
with me. Yeah, yeah, you betcha. So, how about
And
yourself, Milan?
like where I just wanted to comment on the story you just said is that, even if he wasn't carrying a resentment to you, it probably
Hmm.
made him feel good that you cared enough about him to go back and make
Yeah,
that amends. Like
yeah,
for somebody that you cared nothing about, right?
yeah,
You may not ever remember what you
yeah.
did to them because like
That's right.
you,
Yeah.
even as the perpetrator of the action that requires the amends,
Hmm.
it meant so little to you, you don't even care. But this was somebody you obviously cared about. And
Yeah,
by going to him and making that amends, it shows, hey man, I wronged you, but also I care enough to come back and to say to you, hey,
yeah,
like he probably thought, like honestly, that like I'm sure that there was some of that inside him at that moment.
yeah. Probably. I know you're right. I never really thought of that side of it.
Yeah. Okay, so you know, I really love the analogy inside recovery of like peeling the onion.
Yeah.
It's like, I started really unaware. I mean, I was full on coming out of addiction, and quite honestly, definitely delusional about my
Hmm.
relationships without any tools to discover like or to unpack the reality of it. I'd never taken psychology in university. Well, I took one psychology course, but I'd never taken enough to have any tools to unpack my motives, my actions, and whatever. Like, and quite honestly, now that I've had the tools of these steps, I feel like I was quite ignorant. And
Oh
it,
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like, so when that last sentence, it's only experiencing freedom that we learned where we learn we were where we were bound before.
Hmm.
Like it's only with these tools that I now get to look back with some clarity and with
Yeah,
these tools to say, okay, here's the event, here's the effects, here's my part. My part was motivated by fears and the other reactions inside these relationships. Like
yeah.
that simple dissection part,
Hmm.
which, quite honestly, I feel that, yeah, there's more amends than you're gonna have from your step 4, 5, 6. But the step 4, 5, 6 revealed to me a lot of the amends I needed to make.
Yeah,
Like th- that was the stuff that was for sure keeping me sick, right?
yeah.
And having done two now, I can already see that there's things I need to go back and do a third set on. You know, and
Yeah.
and for me, I think that I'm gonna either, probably go through a CODA set of steps
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to just to just to shake it up and have some sort of
Yeah.
different probings and some different questions. And, so for me, that statement, when I read that statement or that series of sentences that I, brought into here, the answers are in different places for each of us. We may not know them until we found them,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, like some of the things that, like my sheer quest for acceptance now in my life,
Hmm.
that all came from my second step four. And I had a whole bunch of different things written down. And it was my sponsor who helped me look and see, like, hey, all these are boiling down to a lack of acceptance.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
that realization was like, okay, he says to me, he said, find your three biggest resentments. Your
Yeah.
three biggest resentments are 95% of the problems in your life.
Hmm.
So, I think that um, I think that statement has been 100% true in every circumstance for me.
Sure.
And can you read step 9 for us now, Dustin?
For sure. So we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I definitely got a couple notes I wrote down on this one yesterday there too, and I'll kind of share on them, and I must bounce it back to you. So the experience that I had in my first step with this, and I think it's worth mentioning here for anybody that's going through them their first time was, and I think I've heard you talk about this as well. Um, as I was writing these out and making my list and getting ready to do my amends, I was already, in true addict form. I was already playing out the outcome in my head. I knew how it was going to work. I was trying to control everything. And, my first set of steps, my amends were obviously the big people in my life, my family, my wife, my kids. And, when it went time to do it, the first thing that happened for me, was when I brought it up to my wife, my significant other. I was met with resistance. This was not something she was looking to do. And, it just completely, it really threw me for a loop. It did. She
I
shut it
saw it.
right down. She was
Yeah.
not there. Yeah, she was not there yet. She did not want it being brought up to the kids. And, I'll be very honest. And the reason I thought it was important to mention this is because it almost derailed me on continuing. It really did. It really hit me hard. And, I was grateful, yourself and others in the group, and, some of the other men in the group that I talked to about this were able to reassure me that, just because I couldn't do them, it didn't mean that that was the only way to do them. So, I chose myself at that point to do the living amends. I thought, okay, I'm not going to give up. I've made this progression so far. And, I've really made a conscious effort to, make my amends to her and my kids by doing the living amends of just showing them by my actions of doing better and becoming a better person. And, maybe one day we'll get there and we'll double back down and I can do those yet. But, um, it was really worth learning to myself that, because that humility piece came in. It wasn't going to work my way the way I thought it was. I wasn't going to be able to control that situation. I had to practice the acceptance of that and not just give up and throw the towel in with it. It was that was a big part for me, and I really wanted to kind of touch on that when we got to this step and share that experience that I had with you. And I mean, yeah, that was really the biggest one that I had that I wrote down when it came to doing this one. What about yourself, Milan? Was there any tough parts, any surprises when you went to do yours?
So, I think you brought up a great point is that, for anybody new and out there, and if nobody said this to you, is that our serenity can't come at the expense of someone else's. Like
Hmm.
that's a really,
Yeah,
really important thing that, like being self centered in the extreme as we are as addicts, it really is all about us to begin with, you know? And we like, you know, um, I myself definitely was someone who almost went off half cocked with some amends before I even had a sponsor, and I even had, my wife demanding my amends right when I got out of recovery, out of treatment, without me even having a sponsor yet, and I literally
yeah,
had to refuse. I was like, I'm not ready. And I know, like, with this look of anger and resentment in your eye, like, it doesn't matter what I say here, this is not going to go well, you
Yeah.
know? So, like, I had the opposite. If you were like, she was like, give me my amends now. Do you know how scary
Yeah.
that is, Dustin? Like,
Oh,
give me
I'll bet. Yeah.
and I'm like, man, like, not, not ready. Like, I'm like, holy shit, the list is long. I can't go here now.
Yeah.
Um, so that, you know, so when I did make my first couple amends, once I got there with a sponsor, my first one was actually to her, and I feel that she deserved it. And like it's funny. My sponsor actually says deserve is a really weird word because deserve means that like you're playing God with the word deserve,
Yeah.
and so either way, I did her first, and it went really well. By the time that I finally got there, I think that we had done enough healing that there was some uh, there was a place of forgiveness in her heart
Mhm.
by then. And then after that, I did my mom, and that went well as well. And then next to come, I tried to do it with my daughter, and that was just like, man, talk about having had an expectation.
Yeah.
It didn't go as I was hoping it would have, and it really showed me that my damage in her life was much more far reaching than I had anticipated or acknowledged.
Mhm.
And I think part of the amends thing is, like, I honestly don't think I'm strong enough yet to not have some expectation.
Yeah.
Like, I, I want to be ready for any outcome, but come on,
Yeah.
my heart wants it to go well.
Hmm.
My heart wants forgiveness. You
Hmm.
know, it's a real, real difficult one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. And then I had one other thing I was going to kind of share on
Yeah.
here too, that was just kind of an example of maybe a different way of, a different way of doing an amends. So it kind of ties back through steps 4 through 9. So on my first set of steps, one of the things that I identified was, and I've shared this in the group for sure, and I think with yourself, when I was younger, I lost my dad in an accident out on our acreage. I was 16
Mhm.
years old, and he had a bad accident. It was not a very pretty sight, and unfortunately, I was the one that found him. And that was one of my things. And one of my things on my step 4 and that I didn't really know how to address when it came to an amends was, I felt really guilty. My dad had, raised me right. I had good upbringing, good morals put into me. He was a good man. And then, I spiraled off and lived this 20-year dark, dark addiction, doing some really heinous things through that 20 years, going against everything of his. And, obviously with him being gone, to try to make an amends to that was something I wasn't too sure. And I was, I had some advice from yourself and others that even something as simple as writing a letter. I was able to write a letter and kind of do it that way to get that amends out. But the other part that I want to share, it kind of, it's worth sharing on that one topic to kind of show how this program works, I think, is that, and it goes back to step 4 again and this one, but when I'm jumping back into the second set of steps now to peel that onion back like you're talking about. So in the first set, I felt, bad about how I'd lived my life after his passing. And it wasn't until doing this progressive work and peeling these layers of the onion back to see that, part of me is actually holding a resentment against him for what happened, for leaving too young when I was a young man. As weird as that is to say, Milan, and that's something that I
I don't
never,
think it's weird at all.
I ideologized. I had idolized him so much as this person that I never thought in a million years that I could be packing a resentment towards him. And then you get into that, and it just kind of goes to show that I think that this will be a continuous thing throughout the rest of a person's life. Because I mean, if you had asked me 20,000 times I would have told you there's no effing way that I could have a resentment towards him for what he did. But as strange as that, it's still strange in my mind that that is. But like there was that. So I wanted to kind of share those two things on this part, like, about being able to make an amends to somebody that's not around anymore, and the different ways of being able to do it by something like writing a letter or that. I think it was just worth mentioning to anybody else that might be coming up to that part, or it was something I sure appreciated that others suggested
Hmm.
to me. Yeah.
Like I had a guy from England on here, Bobby, and
Hmm.
Bobby was unpacking some of his feelings of abandonment from not having a dad. And
Yeah.
it made me realize that there was a lot about my dad being sick and dying when I was 4 that I've never unpacked.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like these are uh, these are the real gems that we're finally getting to see here because of this
Yeah.
program, Dustin. Like, dude, we
Yeah.
would have kept this shit buried and stayed sick our whole lives without the tools
Yeah.
right now for us to
Yeah.
dig deeper and see how, these feelings of abandonment and loss are affecting us
Yeah.
in ways that we never actually held out and looked at, you know?
I, I think a person was so sick there was no way to even acknowledge it or even get close to being able to touch on it
Well, that comes
before.
here
So, maybe,
to the last thing I've got on this here
sure.
is making amends is necessary to live free of guilt, shame, and remorse that keep us trapped in self-destruction. An honest relationship with ourselves and real tangible change in our lives is necessary for the amends to have much value.
Hmm.
How has that been the case in your recovery or not, Dustin Mother effin' J?
So, I kind of liken it back to that story I mentioned earlier about, going back to one of my past employers. You know, I think that until you do the amends, you kind of carry the guilt and the shame and the remorse. And once you take the act of doing the amends, it kind of unpacks that and lets that go. It lets it off your shoulders. There's definitely a part of it. I don't know if everybody's the same way. Like I've mentioned on here before already. I have some OCD and anxiety stuff that I struggle with, and I still struggle with it quite bad. And I found that with any of the amends and the continuing amends that I try to do, even my living amends, I can I can really stall it out in my own head. I start overthinking everything. I start, building up an anxiety towards doing it. I compare it to when I was little. I used to hate going to the dentist. You hated it. You need to do it, but you didn't want to do it because you were thinking about what might come. You're thinking about that pain. You're overplaying it in your head. I think it's kind of the same thing for me. Every single one of my amends that I've done, I have to do them fast. If I sit and stall on them, once I know I have to do them, the longer I stall and procrastinate, the worse it's going to get. I need to do the band-aid effect and just rip it off and do it. And what's going to be is what's going to be because even even the ones of like I'll go back to the stuff with my wife and my kids, that situation that didn't play out the way I thought it was going to. Once it was done and I knew that was the outcome, I was relieved afterwards. I had tried, I had done it, and I continue doing the living amends. And I think that's where the growth comes in. Until you let go of that stuff that's carrying on you, you can't continue to find the things that are down. Like I'm sure that, there'll be tons of different steps and, starting to work with sponsees myself, when they're going through theirs, I'm going to see stuff that I didn't see. I think I do truly believe that this is a lifelong progression and a person's just going to keep finding more and more stuff. Stuff's going to happen, not just the stuff that's happened. We're continuing to grow and live. There's going to be more resentments formed. I mean, as much as you're trying to live a good life now, life throws shit at you sometimes. So I mean, you're going to have to continually be unpacking those things, and I think the only way to grow is by making the amends is letting go of it. I think that's kind of me. It's accepting it, it's acknowledging it, and it's kind of you know, letting go of it, getting it off your shoulders. Like I literally feel a physical difference in my body after I've done one. I feel it in my shoulders and my neck and my back. That's where I carry my stress.
Mm,
And you know, I can literally feel that weight lifted when it's done. I mean that's kind of what that jumps out to me when you ask that, Milan.
nice. And, For myself, it it really is like, demands are a real step to freedom for us.
Mhm.
Like for, that self-forgiveness and that self-acceptance. And I love that sentence, like the guilt, shame, and remorse that keeps us trapped in self-destruction. Because when we don't think we're
Yep.
anything but a piece of shit, we
Mhm.
treat ourselves like a piece of shit.
Yep.
you know, and an honest relationship with ourselves and real tangible change in our lives are necessary for amends to have much value. And our talk
Mhm.
is cheap by the time we enter recovery,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like without, first of all, honestly being able to see our part and what amends we need to make. Like that's the honesty right there. An honest relationship with ourselves about how our actions affected others in the past and how they are right now, right? But without those real living amends to back up our words, like verbal amends is is like a fart without change. Like
Hmm.
it's just like,
Yeah.
ooh, that smells, but, but
Yeah.
there's no poop in the toilet bowl.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah.
And but it really takes us changing the way we live, and
Yeah.
so I really feel like today, we've talked a lot about change inside
Hmm.
this, First of all, our willingness to have our shortcomings removed from us by our higher power, and then us working towards our own change of self acceptance and forgiveness of ourselves and others, you know? Like
Yeah.
they say to make amends to the people who you feel have caused you pain the most,
Hmm.
for those are the most
Yeah.
effective amends out there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, is there anything else you've got on the subjects?
No, I think that's pretty much it, Milan. I think that's yeah, I covered them pretty well. So
Well, I think that was another great episode on Breakfast Recovery with me and Dustin J. Tune in next time for more recovery fun, everyone. Take care. Love you so much. Please help us help others. If you like what you've seen here today, please subscribe and share this podcast and help us get to 100 followers. We're looking for interaction with our audience. So please email recoveryfreedomrising@gmail.com or contact Milan South Okanagan Starcic on Facebook with questions, topic suggestions, or just comments. We'd love to hear from you.